Hello, I'm John Morgan, a British Army Reserves officer since 1985. And in the 1990s, I ran an exercise with Ian Chalky White. We became friends. 2 years ago, I moved with my South African wife and young children to Durban, where I spent half the year. A great friend, neighbour, and Special Forces books author, Jonathan Pittaway, introduced me to Rhodesian-born Dave Scales, who was featured prominently in his and other publications. The extraordinary similarities between Chalky and Dave's parallel careers in the Special Air Service, as direct contemporaries but from different continents, became clear when, shortly before COVID, I introduced the two men to one another at my military sales depot here in Shaftesbury.
Well, it's been a long time waiting to do something about this.
Chalky, it has indeed, but at least we've spent some valuable time together, getting to know each other even more. And yeah, I've been looking forward to doing this for a while.
Yeah, it's just been too long. Do you know, I wonder how much people actually know about the Winged Dagger and the SAS in general. I'll tell you what, why don't we just run through a few things?
Okay.
I mean, as we all know that everybody's got this idea of what it really is. Is it the Winged Dagger? Is it the
Flaming
Excalibur?
sword?
Yeah, the flaming sword of Damocles. But either way, everyone should really know that it's a double-edged weapon.
Yeah.
And it will cut both ways.
Yeah.
I think what I would like to tell you is how much I sort of was missing the part of my SAS education, which was, why have I got A Squadron? Why have I got B Squadron? Why have I got D Squadron and G? What happened to C? And for me, it took a long time, because obviously just a soldier I was getting on with things, before I realised that there's a whole history around why there is no C Squadron in 22 SAS. So here's one. Where is it?
Right, you're speaking to the man. And I love telling the story, Chalky. We always knew who you were. Why you didn't know about us, I don't know. Because if you go back in time, where did our association really begin with the SAS? Well, it actually began with the Long Range Desert Group, 1941. They were looking for volunteers. The Rhodesians sent up 100 of them. And we were actually guiding you to various targets in the Western Desert. S Patrol, L Detachment, Long Range Desert Group. After our tour with you, the New Zealanders took over from us. So it was 1941. I know after the war, the British SAS was disbanded for a while. But in 1951, now this is where the C Squadron part comes in. In 1951, there was a unit in Rhodesia called the Southern Rhodesia Far East Volunteer Unit. Bit of a flipping mouthful there. But once again, the British were looking for volunteers. And
what was this for?
Malaya.
Ah, so we're into the Malayan conflict.
Correct, 1951. 119 of us went up, and we were known as C Squadron Malayan Scouts. Brackets on, SAS, brackets off. That is where it started, the Malayan Scouts.
So the counterinsurgents war in Malaya.
Correct. Okay, and we excelled there. We learnt a lot from that. And after the Malayan campaign, I think we did an 18-month tour there. I'm not quite sure. But we buggered off and back to Rhodesia, and the SAS was resurrected in Ndola, northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. And that is where C Squadron Rhodesian SAS came into it.
It was just that the main part is obviously the clock tower in Hereford, where all our soldiers that die in service are actually displayed on the clock tower. And the plinth was missing. There was no C Squadron plinth, so there was no clue to me as to who, why and what is this C Squadron. And that's where the interest came on mine, because obviously both of us are here, so both of us are pilgrims.
Yep.
And both of us have beaten the clock.
Indeed we have. I was in Hereford the other day. I went to the clock tower. I had a look at the roll of honour of the Rhodesians that died in Malaya. And of course I went over to Pilgrim's Gate to have a look at our plinth there, which we eventually moved from Rhodesia into South Africa and now over to the UK.
Excellent.
But obviously we are very proud to have our roll of honour on one side of the clock tower, very special, and I am extremely proud to be a member of your association. You must also remember, Chalky, we became good. We became very good, and I'll tell you why we did. Because we were trained by you guys. So we had British SAS guys out in Rhodesia giving us training. We also had parachute regiment guys coming out to give us training. And then it ended. Why did it end? Well, after the SAS moved from northern Rhodesia down to southern Rhodesia, and we were then known as C Squadron Rhodesian Special Air Service, in 1965 we declared independence from Britain. We were not popular with the British, and sadly our ties were then cut with the British SAS, formally and informally, with our last exercise actually having taken place in Aden in 1962. But we kept C Squadron going. We kept the name of the SAS going.
It's interesting because world politics decreed what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And that made that. I like the other side of things is when you and I are now both pilgrims, and you know that term of why the SAS are called pilgrims, and it goes back to that clock tower and the famous verse from the Golden Road to Samarkand that's on that clock tower. And I don't know about you, but to me it's probably the most poignant verse that means so much to me. We are the pilgrim's master. We shall go always a little further. It may be beyond that last blue mountain barred with snow, across that angry or glimmering sea, which brings us on to selection, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because here we are, two different environments. You're in Africa, I'm in Europe. Tell me about your selection.
Our selection course was held in the Inyanga area of Rhodesia, Eastern Highlands, very similar to Brecon Beacons type of terrain, lots of valleys, lots of dales, lots of high mountains. And obviously selection starts from a recruiting drive. We were somewhat different to you. 22 SAS would only take potential, can I call it recruits, to come on selection course if you had 3 years of experience already. We were recruited straight from school. So 1 minute you're in the classroom, the next minute you're out, you're being prepared for a selection course by the SAS. We have a 3-week run up to it. They teach you how to map reading, because you must remember now we're straight out of school, we know nothing about soldering. But what they want to do is that they want to test your will, they want to they want to test your sustained effort bit that you may have. And unlike a lot of other units in Southern Africa, I've served in other special forces groupings there, where you do selection as a group. We didn't do it as a group. We did it individually. It's very easy to walk in a group and do nothing, because there will always be a natural leader.
Yeah, you get carried.
So you're on your own. You would be dropped off, and they would say, right, this is your RV, off you go. The truck would then move on 10 kilometers, and the next recruit would jump out.
So, actually, we're very similar start. Apart from, we've probably had a bit more experience before we do it.
Yeah.
But what I'd like people to understand is that you don't just end up in the Welsh mountains and obviously from what you said, in the African bush without a bit of training. We also went through all our map reading tests and survival of what you do in environment about hypothermia and all the rest of it. So you were prepared for things to go wrong in the mountain. However, I don't know about your selection, but we have had deaths on our selection, and it does happen. But if you're trying to get the best soldiers, sadly, something like that is going to happen. Did it happen often with you guys?
No. Talking, I think the reason why you had deaths on Penny Fan in specific, I did have the privilege of walking it with my wife 2 weeks ago. When the weather comes down, when the wind blows, when the snow is falling, when you can't see, it's going to be inevitable that that will happen. In Africa, we don't have strong winds, we don't have snow, we have clear sunny days. We made sure that we had enough water.
Heat exhaustion being the biggest
Yeah,
thing.
but you know, Nyanga is full of streams, so you were able to get enough water. You must remember now, you're a recruit, you don't know anything about survival yet. So you had the SAS watching you. You weren't allowed to team up with anybody. You got to the RV that evening, they'd have a look at your dress, they'd have a look at your kit, and they'd have a look at how you're behaving. You would your morale would be uplifted by your other mates that are coming in. Some of them during that time would say, well, you know, it's not for me, and they would leave.
You see, that individual thing, it happens to us on test week.
Did you have that on your selection course, though? Did you go on your own?
Yeah, when you do test week, it's like you do those first 3 weeks, and you basically, because of the amount of people that turn up, and there was a huge amount, and you start in groups, and it thins out and thins out and thins out. But when test week starts, that's where you get told, right, I want you at the guard room, 3 o'clock in the morning, 40 pounds in your rucksack and your rifle. And that's it. Nobody wakes you up, nobody gets you up. You do that, you get there on time. And that's probably the start, because if you're not there, that's you finished.
Yeah.
And so then you go out into the Welsh mountains and you come off the back of the truck, they call your name, you go forward, they give you the checkpoint that you've got to do, and you can't mark a map or anything. I don't know about you, but we weren't allowed to mark maps. And they give you the grid reference, and off you go.
Chalky, what did you do at the end of selection? What happened then?
This is after the whole, like you, it ran for about 6 months. Are you on about that bit?
Yeah, after you've done your selection, you now go onto your specialist training, which we did, which would have been about 6 months all in all. We still had to pass very high standards along the way, your fitness, your theoretical exams, your practical exams. So even though you had passed a physical endurance march as such, you still had to go through the specialist training. And at the end of that, before you went on parachute course, before you got your wings, you'd do an all-in exercise. And that was your final test.
For us, the final in my day was that you were on escape and evasion. You did the escape and evasion, you were running around the hills ragged, you were chased by another unit, and then you inevitably were caught because it all aimed you into a bottleneck where you were caught, and then you underwent interrogation. And that lasted a fair amount of time. And it was at the end of that when they tried to tell you that it's over, because you can imagine being interrogated and then some guy appears at the other side of the table and says, "That's it, it's finished with." Of course, you're not going to believe it, are you? Because
No.
you think, here's the tricks of interrogation. And for me, it lasted a good 15 minutes before I realised that it was over.
It was over, yeah.
What was interesting, I don't know how you, when I went back to the billet to find how few people were still left on that course.
Yeah.
Because you were all shuffled in a room, and every time you went through a different phase of selection, guys used to just disappear as they failed
Yeah.
and just went back to their unit. And
Yeah.
it was sort of coming back off a certain exercise and going, "Where's he gone? Oh, he failed." And that's it. But is that what you were on about? I mean,
Yeah,
mine
yeah.
was escape and evasion. What was yours?
Yeah, it's same. So an all-in exercise was back in Nyanga. The SAS were your enemy. They would chase you, they would look for you, they would put ambush positions for you. They had a vague idea where you would be at a certain time. We had the police against us, the police were also looking for us. We had civilians that would wander around, farmers, etc. So if anybody saw you, they would report you.
It's the same for us. They formed the police, they informed the
Yeah.
local population,
Yeah.
and they're all you classed them all as enemy as far as you were
Yeah.
concerned.
So I was lucky, I wasn't caught.
I wasn't.
But, right. But during that all-in period, what you had to do was that you had to put the skills that you had been taught into practice. In other words, you would do a lake crossing in a Klepper canoe, you would put dummy explosives onto a bridge, etc., etc. You would have to communicate on your HF radio and so on.
You see, that was different for us. We were
Okay.
just out and out. I mean, we had been, before the escape and evasion, we had been stripped.
Yeah.
We handed in all our stuff. They gave us back certain pieces of clothing that we were issued a couple of nights before, and it was old World War II stuff that was ripped. And I mean, I ended up with boots with no socks, and after running around the Welsh hills for a week, I ended up with trench foot.
Yeah.
So you just had to get on with it and finish it. So we didn't have to do the bits like you were on about, although during our training, each segment, we were always tested.
Yeah.
We were always tested. We did a jungle because we could. We did, you did the Welsh Mountains, you then did fire and movement on the ranges in Sennybridge in Wales, and then you went and did a jungle phase.
All right. Yeah.
So you had a completely different environment to
Yeah.
be tested in. And mine lasted about 3 to 4 weeks. And then you came back and you entered another phase. And then finally into escape and evasion.
So, just getting back to our all-in exercise, no holds barred. You could do what you want. If they caught you, you can escape. There was one guy that was actually caught by the police and he was sent to prison. Well, in the police cells in the local police station, but one of the other recruits said, "Hang on, I'm going to get this guy out of here." And he was a foreigner. He went in, he spoke to the police. He said, I'm on a camping holiday here. Can I sleep in the police station? And they said yes. And he managed to get the keys and get the guys out and stole the police Land Rover and drove out of the exercise area. Great initiative. In terms of the interrogation, we were only allowed to, I don't know if you're allowed to use that word interrogate anymore, interview. let's call him that,
Yeah, let's call it an interview.
for 24 hours, and then you had to let him go. And he had to make his own way back to his
No,
to his patrol.
we finished on the interrogation stage.
Yeah, and then after that we did our parachute course. We then had the ceremony of getting your parachute wings, and then we were deployed. I don't know how it worked with you.
We then were basically after the interrogation phase, you probably had about a day or two, got yourself together, and then you went down to RHQ and you collected your belt and berry from the colonel, and that was it. You then were off to a squadron to be placed in a troop. I mean, there's the other odd thing that you and I have discussed, because obviously 22 SES being larger and had more squadrons,
Yeah.
you then went into a squadron and you hoped that you were going to get something like
Yeah.
the air troop, the Sky Gods, and then you end up like me in boat troop instead. But you then join these other guys, and that's it. Wherever they go, you go.
There you go, yeah. So we were different to you. We had 2 troops. So let me tell you, during this time of when I was there, the total strength of the SAS was 60. So we had 2 troops. We had A Troop based in this building, which we called Main Block, after your Paddy Main.
Oh, Paddy Main,
Yep.
yeah.
And we had B Troop, which were in a building called Lewis Block, after Jock Lewis. We didn't have Sterling lines. We just had those 2 characters. And only after a long time did I really understand who these guys were. And my goodness me, this Paddy Main character, didn't he epitomize the SAS man in the world today?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I was, unlike you, I was extremely lucky and had some time in Oman and actually met Sir David Sterling, which was a real tick in the box for me. That was just something else.
Do you know that he lived in Rhodesia for a while, David
No,
Sterling?
I didn't.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. So we had these 2 troops, and in each troop we had 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and in B Troop 5, 6, and 7. We also had a mortar troop. So the size of our section was more or less 6 people. We had to operate in smaller groups because after the normal border control, the war really only started hot up around about November 1972. Up until then, we were deploying along the Zambezi River and on the borders of Rhodesia, just doing normal border control, where we would operate in groups of 8. But when the war started, the teams had to cut down to 4 because our helicopters could only take 4 people, which meant that we had to take limited food. We had to really watch the weight of the helicopter. So our operations then would last for 6 weeks, but we would get resupplied every 10 days by Dakota. Anyway, that was a breakdown of how the Rhodesian SAS was. 2 troops, 4 sections in each troop. And I'm not forgetting training troop was also around then.
I suppose that the real difference is that you were stuck in Africa and in Rhodesia, and that's where your environment was. Whereas 22 did many things, deployed to the northern flank in the Arctic Circle. So you could be there, you could be in Central Europe doing exercises there, you could be deployed into Africa in a few places, and into the deserts and into the jungles. So we had a wider world to play in.
Yeah, you did indeed.
So it was a lot interesting that way.
Well, we had a war to fight. So unfortunately, we couldn't do exercises with foreign special forces units. Like I said to you, the last time we did an exercise with the British SAS was in Aden in 1962. So with the war hotting up, we had to get on with it. The war It was actually the second war. We had the first war, which is known as the First Chimurenga. That took place in 1968, and that consisted of guerrillas, terrorists, whatever name you want to use, crossing over into Rhodesia in large groups and attacking targets. We neutralized that pretty quickly because we had excellent trackers. With our border control, we were picking up spoor. We had the local population on our side. They would give us a lot of intelligence. And basically, the insurgents weren't making much progress. They went back, they had a rethink about it all, and they decided to study Mao Zedong's doctrine more closely. And this is when it really became difficult for us, because what they did was they crossed over in small groups and they started to attack soft targets, like your farmers, like your missions, like your schools, like your clinics. They lived with the local population. Unfortunately, the local population were also interrogated, beaten up. It was tough on those buggers. Who do they listen to? Do they listen to us, or do they listen to the guerrillas? And that posed a big problem for us because the intelligence dried up. We weren't getting any information from the police, who were stationed in these very rural areas. We weren't getting any information from the locals, because if the terrorists came across locals that had told on them, they would have been killed.
Yeah.
So you can't blame them. So what did we do? We had to get really organized. We had to say, right, this is it. Internal operations are over. And we went external. And our first launching pad for that, we were still friendly with the Portuguese in Mozambique. And what we did was we took over an airfield, a disused airfield, and from there we launched teams into Mozambique on hunter-killer operations. Right, so let me elaborate a bit more. We took over this airfield called Macombi from the Portuguese. The Portuguese were getting hammered by the terrorist groups anyway. And we thought, okay, well, this is a wonderful time for us to step in because we can, in return, give them intelligence about Frelimo, which was their enemy. So Frelimo was supporting Zanla, which was one of the terrorist groupings, which were infiltrating Rhodesia from Mozambique, and we had to get stuck in and go and find them. Now, not having any real intelligence out there, how did we find them? How did we find these terrorist camps? So, because we were very skilled at tracking, we would do a lot of what was called cross-graining, and we would basically comb areas of Mozambique looking for tracks, of which we found and of which we followed up. And our modus operandi from there on was, well, let's locate these terrorist camps, training camps, transit camps. Let's find where these arms caches might be. Let's ambush these guys. Let's get on with it. And we did this for months and months and months, and we were winning. We were getting to what we wanted to do, and we had become really skilled at hunter-killer operations. So it was a bit difficult to get teams in by with helicopter all the time. So another way of getting our guys in Chalky was via parachute. So, like your SAS, we had free fallers. I was very pleased to have done a free fall course in 1972. And in 1973, we had an urgent call out. A hostage had been taken by the terrorists, and they were moving him back into Zambia, and we had to find them. So a normal Pathfinder operation would entail getting airborne in a Dakota, type of aircraft you guys used in the Second World War. We still had some. They were very serviceable. They were great aircraft. And we would typically fly into Mozambique in the early part of the evening. We needed an horizon. We didn't have the luxury of oxygen like you guys had. We had to suck oxygen until leaving the aircraft. So the trick was, when you leave the aircraft, hold your breath for a while until you get to about 8,000 feet, where there would be enough sufficient oxygen. So my first one was rather scary. There were 4 of us on the jump, and our aim was to find a DZ for the squadron that would come in the next night and form up into hunting groups and to become more aggressive with fighting patrols and putting ambushes down and preparing ourselves for camp attacks. So we exited the aircraft at about 13,000 feet, and on the way down I was horrified to see Frank Wilmot, an ex-parachute regiment guy from the UK, who went into a bad spin and sadly spun all the way into the ground. Ooh. So before the operation started, we've lost 1 guy. Ooh. We had to find a DZ. We hadn't found Frank. We would find him later. And we walked and walked and walked. We told the aircraft, obviously, that 1 man down. And we thought, well, if we can find a DZ and we bring the SAS in that night, we could go back and find Frank.
It was imperative then to find your own fallen.
Yeah, we've got to find him. We couldn't find a DZ in time. A decision was made, abort. You can then catch up with the next Pathfinder team in time to come, but the trick is to go and find Frank. So we had a brilliant flipping patrol commander. Took a back bearing and flipping led us right back to where we landed. We hunted around and we found Frank. We found him in quite a state, and what gave us the clue on where he was his backpack had burst and his ration tins had come out. And this was early in the morning and the dew had settled on the shiny tins. We went over, we found Frank, we wrapped him up in a parachute, and we had to call for a helicopter. Well, because we were so far in enemy territory, the helicopter didn't have enough fuel to come all the way. So they dropped fuel on the border. The helicopter pilot then decided he'd fly in on his own. He'd leave the flight technician or engineer, the gunner, behind. And he flew all the way in, collected Frank with the parachutes, and flew all the way back. So we were a three-man team on the ground who were then told, right, the next Pathfinder team are in this position and you need to go and join them. That was my baptism of fire. How old was I? I was just under 21 years old. So I was fresh behind the ears, and what a way to start an operation. But that's it. Who dares wins. Anyway, we teamed up with the next Pathfinder team, and we continued with our hunter-killer groups. Now, just as I've been talking about this, I thought of you, because we were trying to get this hostage back, who had been captured by this terrorist group, and he was being frog-marched back to Zambia. And that prompted me to ask you about this hostage incident that you were involved in, Operation Nimrod. Tell us about that.
Oh. B Squadron, my squadron,
Yeah.
were at that time doing the anti-terrorism group, which is the siege busters, the guys that would be involved in any anti-terrorism operation. So 6 guys pull up in front of the Iranian embassy and charge in through the door, grabbing hold of the copper on the way, poor old PC Locke, who had no chance to pull his weapon, and bundled him into the Iranian embassy and basically got out the guns and took over the Iranian embassy. I was coming back from learning to be a fake fireman at a airport, so I'd been on a fireman's course on an airport to learn how to blend in with them in case ever there was an anti-terrorist situation on an airport. So you learn all these odd jobs. So I came home, my bleeper goes, and I get called in straight away. I get there and the guys are all bundling up their kit and they're saying, we're all going off to London. Did you hear there's been an anti-terrorist thing? And I knew nothing about it. So we all piled in the vans, off we went to London. Just short of London, we pulled in at an army camp and we were then given the brief. And that was the first time I really knew what the hell was going on. And I was told that some terrorists had taken over the Iranian embassy and a siege was ensuing at that time. Right, what goes on then? So we do a bit of a plan. The spooks had got together and they'd got us a placement in the next door, which was the Surgeons Club.
So what's a spook?
A spook? Oh, an intelligence guy.
Right, okay.
So the intelligence, I mean, we do have a nickname for the army intelligence, but I don't think I should put it out over the air because people won't like that too much. Because you know our humour.
Yeah.
Yeah, military humour doesn't go down everywhere. Anyway, off to London in some big Pantechnicon white vans, pull up at the end of the road of Princess Gate, and then hunking our kit over fences until we get next door to the Iranian embassy, which we then all go in and sort ourselves out. Immediately we get in, one team gets all their kit on and gets ready. They're the immediate action. So you have a team of guys, all their kit, all ready to go, body armour, MP5, sledgehammers, absolutely grenades, everything. And they're ready to go. And the others sort themselves out, get themselves, where am I going to sleep tonight if this goes on much longer, and all the rest of it, and settle down on the floor of the club, the Surgeons Club. And then, of course, at a certain time, we would swap over. Another lot I would become the immediate action group, and somebody else would then get downtime. So this went on a couple of days. So we needed to start formulating plans, because at the moment we're on an immediate action, which is, something goes wrong, bang, you're off, and you're going to try and hammer down doors and get in straight away. Now that's an interesting one, because on about the third day, they find the caretaker, and the caretaker said, or lets out this little bit of information that nobody knew, that all the ground floor windows were armoured. So there we would have done is run up and try and put sledgehammers through an armoured window, and of course just bounce back off.
Yeah.
Luckily that didn't happen, but then the plans started to formulate because we were going on. You would still stand to for an IA. Every time the food came in or negotiations hit a critical part, you would stand to and you would get ready. So for the next few days, you were sort of off, on, off, on. If you were off, you then started to do other things, which was get ready for the real plan. Do a bit of training, do a bit of intelligence gathering. The intelligence people were then starting to give us bits of information, and we were starting to get ready. Eventually a plan was formulated. By that time, they'd lost a hostage already. The terrorists' deadline wasn't met, so they actually shot the person, and the body was thrown out the door, and it was then collected and all the rest of it. I think at that time, Cobra, which is the government's ministerial group that handles this type of thing, had decided that there was going to be no negotiation as in release. It was going to have to come to a different conclusion. So the planning went on, and it went on a few more days, and the deadline started to creep where another body was thrown out, and then it got to another stage that the government ticked the box and said, we've got to end the situation. So what happened then, officially, the police handed over the situation to our colonel, who was Mike Rose at that time. So it was handed over to him, and my commander was given the go. So we all got ready, and there's some great stories in the planning, but I'll save them for another day, because the humour of B Squadron is not being shown at the moment, but B Squadron was full of characters. Deadly earnest, professional soldiers, but we had some real characters. So there was other things going on that people wouldn't believe that was happening at the same time. We did the plan, and then we were heading to another deadline, and we were all told to go into position. So we all crept up into our positions, getting ready, and then we're waiting for the iconic standby, go. And then everybody deploys and cracks the embassy in many entry points, and we then start to clear our areas. I mean, for instance, on the second standby, my friend was in charge of lowering a little device at PE into the light well where I was going to gain entry. And he blew that, and it blew all the windows and the glass in. And so stand by, boom, go. And we were off. And that's what it is. I then came down a caving ladder with all this paraphernalia with sledgehammers, fireman axes, MP5, 9mm on my hip, flashbangs all the way around me. And as I'm hanging from this caving ladder, I didn't know at the time I lost my pistol because the kit wasn't that good. The strap that was holding my pistol in obviously went and I lost my secondary weapon. But luckily, with the MP5 strapped on my chest, that was it. I entered the building and my area, I was part of a team. I wasn't a key man. I was one of the youngest. So one of the youngest, most inexperienced. You can guess who goes in first through the window. Muggins. So off I get in, my oppo comes in, the other two come in, and then we start clearing rooms. We do really well, we clear our area, and then we decide to go down the stairs to the next area because we could hear there was problems. And there were classic problems. There was doors that weren't opening, guys were stuck. Luckily, they were coming round the front, which is the balcony that everybody sees on TV, so that was happening. The place was starting to burn, so there was fire, because you got these huge, great windows, and they had shutters, wooden shutters. And of course, as soon as you've got fire in there, like the flashbang goes in there, and one of the flashbangs, 7 blinding flashes, 7 ear-deafening crashes, which is all about disorientation, which we've trained in, so we're good on that. But they also started a fire, and it was getting between these window covers, and it's like an eaves effect, a chimney effect, in fact. And so the whole thing was starting to burn. So we had that happening. The terrorists were found, the hostages were found, and I'd got to the area of my, what they call limit of exploitation, and I was held back. And my mates then came through and cleared the other area. Then we came down. And I was then left in a hostage clearing situation. But before that, funnily enough, because I'd done the fireman's course and the guy that had done it with me, we noticed the back room was really burning badly. And we didn't think we needed to do something about it. And Chris and myself went in there with fire extinguishers and actually got the fire under a fair amount of control in that area, and came out and joined the queue to get the hostages out. Now everyone thinks that hostages, you'd go, oh, out you go, all the rest of it. We found the best way was to get hold of someone and actually throw them to the next guy. And we would only be about 3 or 4 feet apart. And you would grab him, turn him, throw him. Get the next one, grab him, turn him, throw him. Funnily enough, not all the terrorists had died at that stage. And as I turned, this guy was thrown to me. And as I grabbed him and turned, and because it's so quickly, that somebody said, terrorist! And I realised, and I'd already let him go, and I'd thrown him down the stairs, because there was a spiral staircase and there was a spiral wall, and I'd already done it with a few hostages. So I was throwing them and turning their back, so they would go down a few steps, bang against the wall and slide down, and somebody else would get him. So this terrorist had gone from me and down the stairwell when I'm hearing the shout, and I join the shout, and I run back the other way because you could look over a balcony down to the next stage. And what was more in my mind was, when this terrorist got handed to me and I threw him down, I had this flash of something in his hand, and I realised it was a grenade. So we couple of us went back to the thing, we're shouting, terrorist on the way down, grenade! And of course that gentleman was then, came out at the other end, still had the grenade in his hand, and he was dealt with. But it was a split second of, you see the films and you think you can take guys on and all the rest of it. Sometimes it's happening so quickly that decisions are made and you're doing something in automation and then suddenly you realise you've let this guy go, but that was sorted. Interesting fact, when we were exfilling and we were going down that staircase, I found another grenade actually on the staircase, just sitting there. So it was like, watch your step, grenade, and it was a Russian type grenade, and we were all stepping over it because you're not going to play with this stuff, are you? And then we all went out into the back garden. And I have this vision. You had all the hostages on the floor in the garden, you know, and they're all being taped together, you know, down on the ground, taped together. Stockholm Syndrome, you heard of that one?
No.
Stockholm Syndrome's where that a hostage has been so long with the terrorist that they begin to have an affinity with them. And in fact, it had already started because there was one terrorist that was out there on the grass and the women folk were already saying, oh, he's the nice one, he's the nice one. So that's the Stockholm Syndrome coming into effect already. But I remember coming out the back and it looked like a cartoonist had sketched it, because there was policemen coming out of everywhere. I mean, I'm sure I looked right and there was a policeman coming out of a dustbin. It just looked bizarre. But we sort of, by that time, we'd handed them over and we were exfilling, so we went straight into next door. And of course, what had been going on while we'd been doing this Iranian embassy? The World Snooker. And so we all charged in, and of course, it would happen to be at the time that the final is playing. So all you got was that the policeman who was looking after us got bombarded with all these burly SAS guys going, who's won the snooker? Who's won the snooker? And I think that guy must have thought that's, apart from the craziest guys, because we did hear that policeman was asked whether at some time during the week would he like to hand over to somebody else, and he said, no, I want to look after these guys.
Yeah.
And I think he couldn't believe what we were getting up to. So there's the bones of it. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more been written and filmed about it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are under the pretext that there were only 6 or 8 people, because that is what they saw on television. How many people were really involved in that?
Well, it'd be...
Are you allowed to tell me or not?
Do you know that great saying, need to know?
Right.
But there was more than the 8 that
Right.
you get in the film.
Okay, say no more. I understand, Chalky. It's a sensible thing to do. But what a great story. I love that. It's fantastic. And you speak so well. So I'm wondering, what about that gas mask that you got here? I mean, you've brought that gas mask with you and you haven't even talked about that yet.
What, the good old S6?
Right.
So every day in training for the anti-terrorists, you wore this. And what people don't realise is that it's really hard to breathe in this.
Yeah.
When you got it on, it doesn't flow like the new ones. It's... And not only that, the vision. That's all you're seeing.
Right.
So what we're seeing now, and depending how good your I can't even say the word, peripheral vision is out here on me. Generally, you're like this. This is all you're seeing. So whatever you're taking on, you've got to move your head to see it. But very good. Just hard to breathe, hard to see. But you train with it every day and it becomes the norm.
Yeah. So, Chalky, what you just mentioned with the Iranian embassy, we didn't do anything like that. We did a CQB course, but we were never involved in anything like that at all. Ours was a bush war. And I know that you've been prompting me to tell you what my favorite operation was. And that's very difficult to answer.
Well, give me something
Why?
that's got a real highlight
I'm going
to it.
I'm going to. But imagine this. And maybe you would like to compare how many you did. Now, this is not a kind of peeing into the wind competition. Imagine this. From 1972 until the end of our war, the SAS was involved in 214 operations. And you're asking me what my favorite one was? They were all my favorite. But
Or maybe favourite's the wrong word.
but what kind of operations did we do? Which would be similar to some of the operations that you did. Well, I've just described to you that for a long, long time in Mozambique from Macombi El Diamento, we were on these hunter-killer patrols, and we weren't getting enough. There were more and more and more terrorists infiltrating the country. We had to remain external, but we had to go for bigger targets. Running around looking for these guys, trying to find the camps was taking a long time. Maybe there was a quicker way on trying to stop them coming into the country. So what did we do then? Well, we started to concentrate on derailing trains. And that's a bit difficult to do because you can't kind of really practice on anything. I think Rhodesia Railways would have been a bit upset if they said, well, listen, can we blow a few of your locomotives up? And we want to see if we're using the right kind of explosive. And we tried and we tested and we got it right. So the type of targets that we attacked against our enemy, sadly, the host country suffered. And we were saying, as long as you want to support these terrorists, to house them, to feed them, to support them, to let them have their bases, to come in and fight against us, well, if you want to harbor them, we are still going to attack. So we had a look at bridges. We were very successful at blowing up train bridges, road bridges, being able to take pre-prepared explosives in half 200-litre drums, filling it up with explosives, getting all the cortex and all the ring mains together, getting to the target, placing the explosives on the piers and on the spans, and inflicting more damage by waiting for the train to come. So you would work it out and say, right, have a look at the telephone poles that are running alongside of the road. From the time that train gets to that point to this point is how long? At what point should we detonate the ring main? And the SAS became very proficient at that and were able to derail trains by blowing them just as they reached the edge of the bridge.
So not only are you damaging the rail, you're damaging their equipment at the
That's
same
right.
time.
Okay, so we would ambush trains, we would derail trains, and we would blow bridges. In addition to that, we did a lot of vehicle mining along their roads. And on that subject, I think one of the classics, if you ask me, conducted by the SAS, was Operation Bluebell.
Okay.
They were known as the Cockle Shell Heroes. We used the same canoes as you. In fact, I think you guys use the same one still, the Klepper canoe.
Yeah, indeed.
2 people. So there were many terrorist camps in Mozambique. There's a massive lake. on the map you'll see it. Cahora Bassa is what it is called. And Cahora Bassa is littered with a number of islands. Now, how about this? Get your canoes, get to one of these islands, and at night time, row ashore. And when you get ashore, take all your mines and mine the roads. Take your time, mine them well, and get out. So back to the water's edge, back in your canoe, back to the island. And of course, what happens? When the vehicles hit the mines, they all run around saying, "Where's the enemy?" Couldn't find us. Can't track over water. They didn't have aircraft. So it was a safe haven. So in a way, one could relax after the operation, plan your next one, row again, go and do a camp reconnaissance, get back to the water's edge, shoot back to the island again.
And still being in their territory.
And still being in their territory. And we did that for months on end. That to me is a classic. There have been other waterborne operations conducted by Sea Squadron, and that was having a bunch of these canoes go down the Zambezi River. And as we were chatting the other day, telling you, well, be very careful when you start traveling down rivers infested with crocodiles, infested with hippos. Because I tell you what, they will sink you. They will sink you very quickly. So very dangerous. And talking about crocodiles, escape and evasion, if you've ever got to cross a river, those are the dangers that you're going to be confronted with. But there were operations that were done whereby some of these terrorist camps were next to the water. Obvious.
Yeah.
They felt very safe. They needed water to wash in, to drink, to cook, and so on. And the SAS simply went down, beached, had a look at the camp, attacked the camp, got into the boats, and buggered off. But not with outboard motors. They make a noise.
Yeah.
So it was going in very quietly, doing a recce, shooting it up, getting back onto the water, and out.
Did they not realise this is what you were doing?
No, not at the time. But what could they do about it?
Yeah, that would be the other thing.
Yeah. So then you can move onto bigger attacks. If you have a look at some of the camp attacks that were found, there were joint operations that used to take place. The SAS did not have enough manpower to attack a camp on its own. Some of the camps were massive. There were some camps 10,000 strong.
Wow.
You can't get a squadron to attack that. So what you had to use, it was a combined operation where you would use the Rhodesian Air Force, you would use the Rhodesian Light Infantry, you would use the Selous Scouts, you would use the Rhodesian African Rifles. The guys would actually come in, do an airstrike, loads of Dakotas would come in as well, parachute at 400 feet, straight into a contact. I think Operation Dingo must be one of the classics as well. That operation resulted in 800 kills, 750 wounded, at virtually no loss to ourselves. So that's how the camp attacks worked. At a stage, and I don't think this is very well known, but it is in the books, and we pledged before we started to do this initiative that we wouldn't discuss anything that wasn't in the public domain. It's been written about in quite a few books, so I'm comfortable to tell you about this too. And that was the training of partisan forces. So we got friendly with the enemy's enemy, okay, and said, hey, we can train you so that you will be more effective against your enemy, but we've also got an enemy, but you need to take us there. And what we did was we trained Renamo, okay, and we lived in their camps, and we worked closely with them, and they guided us to targets, And whatever happened, they were given the credit for it. And a classic example of that operation was when the oil refineries were struck by the SAS. We wiped out all the fuel. The whole fuel depot in Beira was gone. We sank their dredges. We sank their navigation buoys. We caused a huge amount of panic amongst the enemy. And all because they were supporting our enemy. So that was another classic one. Freefall operations, I've touched briefly on it. There's a wonderful story. I wasn't on this particular operation. But how about 23 freefallers exiting an aircraft at great height to put up road ambushes? I've never known of 23 freefallers coming on. And we're talking about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, even today, if you talked about that amount of freefallers doing something, that would be a great feat. Looking back, our feats were brilliant. If we even go back, Chalky, to 1941, what the SAS was doing, Paddy Mayne and crowd, we haven't been able to replicate that.
No.
I know a number of outfits that have wanted to go onto airfields and blow the aircraft up. And no one has done it have done it as successfully as the SAS did. You look at the oil refineries and the pipelines and the airfields and the aircraft that they blew up. Absolutely amazing. I haven't seen it in anything like that yet.
No, even in the modern times, in the Falkland War, the SAS had a great operation against Pebble Island, which was where the Argentinians had their aircraft on the island themselves, and that was one of the squadrons took that out, which was another success. So the squadron that did that must have really harked themselves back to Paddy Mayne's day.
Yeah,
when they
for
were
sure.
doing the same sort of
But you
thing.
were involved in the Falklands War.
Yeah, I was, but at a different stage.
So what stage were you there at?
Well,
What did you do? Yeah.
at first they deployed 2 squadrons to go down, and it was not B squadron. So it was G and it was D, and they both deployed down with the boats, and of course they did South Georgia, and then they did the landing and they were at San Carlos Water. Now, as they were doing that bit, the Argentinians then brought into gameplay their Exocet missiles that were on the Super Entard Dart aircraft. Now, they'd only got a squadron of these damn things, and they'd got quite a few of these missiles. Why was it such a thing? Because we lost, I think it was 2 or 3 ships to these missiles. And literally the Atlantic Conveyor, which was not a military ship, but it carried the Chinook helicopters, and it carried a lot of stuff that was really going to be needed, and they took this out. So the Exocet missile then became the great threat. So B Squadron back in Hereford then started to train as for an operation to find where the aircraft were and to take them out. So we were going to find these aircraft, and B Squadron were going to be deployed to remove that threat from the war. So what happened? Lots of training in Hereford, and then eventually we were deployed to the Ascension Islands, which is an island that's sort of halfway from the UK to the Falkland Islands, which people don't realise how far that is apart. But it's on par, and it's just off from Africa, and there's the Ascension Islands. So B Squadron deployed down to there. We'd already been semi-devised into what sort of situation we were going to do, but One of the ideas was to insert people into Argentina to look for the aircraft, so that was deployed. The next lot of idea was my team, which was a boat troop team, and we were then deployed into the South Atlantic, and we had a different insertion method, which I'll explain in a minute. And then the main squadron were waiting to do probably a Hercules land on the airfield and just take out the aircraft. I'll go back to my bit. So 8 of us were put together, and the idea was that we would fly down to the Falklands and then parachute into the sea, get picked up by a ship, and then transfer to HMS Onyx, which was the only diesel submarine, O-class boat as they call it, down there in the Falklands operating. There was a nuke or two down there, but this was a diesel, so it was almost like the World War II boats. So what happened? Firstly, 8 of us got on board of this Hercules and we flew down to the Falklands. Yeah, sounds easy, doesn't it? You know, let's just fly down to the Hercules, fly down to the Falklands. Okay, what did it entail? 2 refueling stations on the way down. So you're in this Hercules, and when it's getting to a refueling time, the aircraft started to climb, because the refueler was faster and couldn't go as slow as the Hercules. So it then flew over, and what happened from height then was the refueler would go into a stall and start dropping, and the Hercules, because it could get extra speed on the drop, would then have this one chance of connecting and refuel. So they would refuel as it's going, and then once it was complete, they would fly off. And then, luckily I was called into the cockpit to see one of the refueling things go on, and I didn't realise how dodgy it was. If it had failed, and that was the interesting thing, I said to the pilot, I said, what happens if it failed? And they said, we're going to Brazil, son. Because there was nowhere else.
Yeah. There
was no other places to go, and Brazil was the nearest place. And he then looked at me and said, if we can make it. So the refueling happened twice. We then get past the 14th hour, and we're over the South Atlantic, and they said, right, that's it, get on, get ready, jump out. So my ears were, the noise, 14 hours of the Hercules aircraft going down there. And then we jumped out into the sea with, parachutes. So we were probably, the 8-man team broke the record for the longest operational flight ending in an operational jump that the British Army or the British military had ever done.
Wow.
So out we jumped, and it was the first time ever I'd got told by the British Army, you can get rid of some kit. What am I talking? The reserve chute. So I got this reserve chute, 32 pounds of reserve chute. So what he said was, look, once you get out the aircraft, your chute's all right, unclip your reserve and throw it away.
Chuck it away. Who wants to do that?
Yeah, no, because you know,
all that nice paracord.
You don't want it. Yeah, that's what you think, but really you don't need it. You want to get it out of the way. So I get out the thing, my parachute deploys in front of me. I have that millisecond where my backside goes like this, because it deploys in front of you when you dope rope, and you wouldn't know because you're a sky god, jump out and do all this high stuff. Anyway, so the chute deploys in front of me. I get a £0.5 6pence, and then I deploy underneath my chute, and I think, I'm going to get rid of my kit. Unclip my reserve, hold it to the right, and for some reason I thought, I'll look down. As I looked down, I realised that I was directly over the ship that was going to pick me up, which was HMS Andromeda. So I was about to bomb. If I'd have let it go, I would have bombed HMS Andromeda with 32 pounds, which had probably done more damage than anything the Argentinians had done during the war on HMS Andromeda. So we landed, we got on it, we got on Andromeda, and they lost our kit because our kit went first out the aircraft. We had to wait. We jumped out, and then the Navy went the furthest point and picked up all the boys and left the kit. Night fell, because it was just getting to that bit, and our kit floated off into the Ulu, floating away. So they dropped the buoy, and then there's this great bit where the rest of the troop then cross-decked to another ship. Cross-decking is what they call it when you move a troop from one ship to another ship. So they cross-decked. 2 lucky people had to stay behind, which was myself and Pete Winner, who was another great friend at one time and at that time. He and I had to stay behind. So we had to stay behind, and we were introduced to the wardroom and that great institution of CSB, Courage Sparkling Bitter. And the next morning we got up, and Pete nudged me and said, "We're going up to the bridge." "What for, Pete?" He said, "Well, we might as well see if we can give him a hand." So we got up to the bridge, and we were looking out for these, for our kit floating in the water. And there's everybody with these binoculars, and it's the only claim to fame I got is when "It's over there." And Pete went, "He's right, it's over there." And we got our kit. So we then got the kit, and we cross-decked to another ship, and then after that we were then taken to cross-deck again into HMS Onyx. So there's 8 guys, SAS troop on HMS Onyx, this O-class submarine, which is not very big at all, and we then floated off, did a couple of exercises, and the idea was then that would be our insertion method to get into the Falkland Islands. They would, or not the Falkland Islands, into Argentina. They would get us near, we would do the boats, inflate them, get off the top, like in the Second World War operations, and zoom in and get ourselves into the Falklands. Luckily, it got to the stage where it wasn't required. So that part of operations in the Falklands ceased, and we then went back to San Carlos water, and by that time it was the end of the war.
By the end of it, yeah.
So we were on mop-up duties, basically.
Right.
So we were probably some of the last ones down into the Falklands, and my troop was definitely the last SAS coming out.
Yeah.
So we had a bit of spare time in Port Stanley, doing the usual things, walking through minefields that you didn't know that were there, and that sort of rubbish. And that was my Falkland Islands campaign. So interesting.
Do you miss it?
I don't know about you, but I miss the buzz. Everyone goes on about drugs and all the rest, and I really don't get it. But there's a thing about when you're shooting, when things are happening, and it's a buzz. It's not a panic, it's not your mind seems to go into sync, and it's counting rounds, it's working things out, and it's like you go into a higher being, and I call it the buzz, and I think a few guys call it the buzz. Did you have the same sort of experience when, shit was in there?
I think the longer that I served in the military, the more confident I became. When I look at the statistics of the amount of operations that were done by a Sea Squadron, and the fact that I stand to be corrected, 37 people killed, is remarkable. The secret to me was the who dares wins attitude. Was it dangerous? Yeah, everything is dangerous. How dangerous was it? Was it more dangerous than those guys that had to get involved in the camp attacks every day, all day, like the Rhodesian Light Infantry? Where would you rather be? Let's have a quick think about the Special Forces bit. If you are going to free fall into enemy territory to go and do a reconnaissance, you've actually got everything on your side. First of all, you are flying high enough that the enemy can't see you, they can't hear you. Because you are in such a small team, when you get to the ground, you are leaving very little spoor. You don't want to get into a scrap. Remember, no one knows that you are there. And stolen fruit always tastes better. So there was a level of comfort knowing that we knew that they wouldn't find us. They were always on the lookout, but the chances of you being compromised by the enemy were slim. I'm talking about long-range reconnaissance, which was our primary role. We had to, yes, it was coupled to a lot of sabotage that I've discussed, a lot of mining, a lot of ambushes, and so on, because we were there then. But my heart goes out to those poor infantry brothers that had to go in on a daily basis into these fire force deployments. Yes, the SAS did a few, but not as much as the Rhodesian Light Infantry, who to me are also unsung heroes from our era, much as the Rhodesian African rifles were.
Yeah,
as
the
well.
common soldier on the ground meets it face to face.
Yeah.
We're sneaking around the back of it.
So, I'm saying the who dares wins attitude to me was right. I love your expression, it ticked all my boxes. I want to use that, but I can't because it's yours.
Yeah. And how about this one? I mean, we used a mnemonic out of the SAS for a while, and speed, aggression, surprise.
Yep.
And that works to a certain degree,
Yeah.
and that got used to a lot. The other biggest thing that I think about the SAS and people should think about, it's not a blunt forced instrument. It's a surgical knife. It's accurate, it's precise, and that's how it should be used for its best.
Yeah. I need to kind of end off some of my stories, and I want to just dedicate this to my dad. Chalky, he inspired me. He's my hero. He's an ex-Brit para. He jumped into Normandy, Operation Overlord. He was wounded there, came back to England, got fixed up, surprisingly enough, went over to the other division and jumped into Market Garden in Arnhem, got wounded twice there. He fought in Norway, fought in Denmark. After the war, he went off to Singapore and he fought there against the Japanese, and then went down to Indonesia and he fought against the Japs there too. And in 1947, the Brits said, go to the colonies. And my dad ended up in southern Rhodesia, and he told me these fascinating stories about his time in the military. And I said, Dad, I want to be a soldier one day too. And he said, you should be, son. You are physically weak, but sustained effort. This is what is going to get you through. I'll support you all the way. And it was only in 1980 when Barbara Cole started to write the SAS book, and she came and she interviewed me and she said, I want to tell you a story about your father. And I said, what? She said, your father was involved in Operation Sculpture with the SAS. And I said, I never knew this. What did he do? And the SAS had to go and meet an agent in Zambia. Couldn't send in the Air Force because then it would have been an active war. My dad had become friends with the guy called Dudley Coventry. He's a famous Brit SAS guy, also an ex-commanding officer of the Rhodesian SAS. Said, listen, can you help us out? Is there any chance that you can fly us into Zambia in your aeroplane and come back in a couple of days' time and pick us up? And he said, sure, I'll do that. I'll do it with pleasure. So not many people knew about this. And he did a few rehearsals. And in those days, well, we're talking about 1967. We're looking at many, many years ago. No fancy GPS in those days. Compass time. Got to this airfield, this remote airfield, northern part of Zambia. Dropped the SAS team off. They went and met the agent. My father flew back to Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. And at the given time had to sneak back into Zambia to pick them up. No other than landing on the main runway of Lusaka International Airport in the middle of the night, but managed to sneak in behind a commercial airliner. So everybody was watching this airliner when it landed. It was on ground radar, didn't pick up my father's little Cessna. The SAS guys were waiting at the end of the runway. The lights of the commercial aircraft was drawing attention from everyone else. My father landed without lights, picked the SAS guys up and flew them back. And I was so damn proud of my dad. And I said, why didn't you tell me that before I joined the SAS? He said, you didn't have to know. So the end of the Bush War, for me with the SAS, came at the end of 1975, but it wasn't the end of my Bush War in Rhodesia. I changed regiments. I went over to the Selous Scouts, which is another interesting story. And when we lost that war, I left the country. And I joined the South African Army. Lost that war too. And that's it. But Chalky, it's such an honor and a privilege to meet someone from the British SAS.
And it is for me
to
meet you.
To share these stories. We're going to be friends forever. We can share many, many happy stories in the future. But I'm going to let you end off. But before you do, Chalky,
cheers, Dave.
You're a great man.
And you, my friend.
Yeah.
So with all the operations you and I did, and the enemy that we were against, I suppose you could say they found the hard end policy.
No true word spoken. Let's go and have a drink.
Indeed.